Hey, that was pretty solid. We're live. Welcome in to 4 for 4's most accurate podcast. I am Matt Okada once again. Here also once again with John Paulson. How you doing, John?
Doing well. How are you?
I'm doing excellent, not only because we got to have the Scott Fishbowl live draft just a couple days ago, but also because I have a dear friend and former co-host of many other fantasy football endeavors, Matthew Betts, here on the podcast as a guest of the Fantasy Footballers at the Fantasy PT on Twitter if you need any injury information, which you won't need by the end of this podcast because we're going to grill Betts on everything you need to know. Betts, how you doing? And tell us a little bit about yourself and what you guys are doing over there.
I'm doing great, man. This just feels right. Okada and I are back together on the mic. This is our first show John and I have done together, so I'm excited to talk with John, especially as we get into training camp discussions here. But yeah, Okada and I have been together for years with the Red Shirts and Ball Blast, and we used to do like 2 shows a week together, Okada, and it feels weird because when we did that, I would host, and then I would kick it to you back and forth. So this is going to be a little bit of a different conversation, but I'm good, man. All is well. In life's crazy right now. My wife and I are expecting our third daughter in about a week and a half, which is perfect timing for training camp and the NFL season. What can go wrong? And then in the fantasy footballers world, life's great, man. Still humming along there with obviously the main show. And last year that we started the Dynasty podcast, which has been a huge success. And in season for me, my main role is with DFS and betting. So covering all sorts of different angles, and then of course all the injury coverage as well. But fun time of year. Training camp's opening up for all the teams this week, so we'll have a lot to talk about, I think, on today's show.
Yeah, definitely should be. Listen, he's a decent follow on Twitter, guys, or X, whatever you want to call it these days.
Twitter.
Twitter. Yes.
I'm with you on
We're going to
Twitter.
hold strong for as long as we can. And just so you're aware, John, we previously trio hosted a podcast with our other co-host named John. So this is very, familiar ground for us. Yeah. Although you have the H, which I'm pretty sure is the right way to spell it. We won't get into that. What we will get into is Scott Fishbowl, because Betts, you finished drafting because you had all slow draft, no live, started a while ago, I assume. John and I just did our 10 rounds of live draft on Saturday. If you're not familiar with the Scott Fishbowl 14, go look around on Twitter, hashtag SFB14, and you will see a million pictures of people's rosters, people talking about how they took a return guy in the 6th round. Both John and I did that. John, well, no, let's start with Betts because your draft is done. What was your approach? Favorite pick? Just give us the overall summary of how it went for you.
Yeah, I was at the 4th pick. And, in the Superflex format, I went with Jalen Hurts to kick things off. I did not realize, unfortunately, maybe a bit of a homer take there, but did not realize, unfortunately, make sure you read the rules to your leagues, everyone, that this is a 3rd round reversal. So when I'm on the clock in the back of the 2nd round, there's still many elite tight ends here. And I was like, you know what, to take this thing down, like you need to hit just on all the dudes really, but like have some stacking upside. It was my opinion. I was like, okay, I'll take AJ Brown here and I'm going to take whatever elite tight end is left when it comes back from the turn. It goes to the 212, and then all of a sudden I'm like, wait, hold on, please. So I am kicking myself in this format because of how tight ends are rewarded, especially the elite guys. At the time of my selection, Mark Andrews was available, Kincaid was available, Trey McBride was still on the clock, or on the board rather. So I was ready to just take whichever one came back to me. And then I was like, oh boy. And it went on a run of elite tight ends, quarterbacks, some of the top running backs. And so I pivoted mid draft. I was like, I guess if people are just not taking wide receivers, I'm going to be the guy taking wide receivers, which in this format, maybe is not the most ideal strategy, but I am, I guess, now zigging while others are zagging, which was unfortunately not on purpose.
Well, they do say that to win a tournament like this, a massive, massive thing, you really do have to zig where others zag. So maybe everybody will think that return guys and rushing quarterbacks is the way to go, and it actually will be wide receivers, and you'll be set. You do have some great wide receivers. Geno Smith is your QB2. And yes, correct. And Ben Sinnott is your starting tight end.
No. Brock Bowers. I just went with rookie.
Okay. Yes, okay. He's hidden amongst all the receivers. Okay, that's not bad then.
I went with likely late, just as a, hey, if Andrews doesn't work out, if he gets injured, whatever. We've seen likely put up some, top 8 or so numbers. So it's not my best work, but we'll see what happens.
All right, John, you went definitely a different direction. There are a few wide receivers in here, but at the top of the draft, it was heavily focused elsewhere. So what was your approach at the 103, which I also had?
Yeah, in Superflex, I like to nab a couple of really good quarterbacks, and I know you and I differ on that strategy, Matt. But there's different ways to win things and win your league, and I like to lock up those. Just such a finite number of really good quarterbacks. I had Lamar Jackson at 103, and then followed that up with Jordan Love. I was planning on taking Jaden Daniels. I thought he'd be available, but he actually went 110, which is the earliest I had seen him go. And
wow,
at this point, then I nabbed Mark Andrews for the stack with Lamar Jackson. Then I realized they both have a week 14 bye, which might not be great for this format, but I will have them for the entire regular season, which is the plus side of that. Kyren Williams in the 4th, Rashid Shaheed in the 5th. We discussed return points last week, Matt. He could be the number 1 overall receiver if he retains the return job there in New Orleans. Alvin Kamara coming back. I think he might get some returns as well. Then the last good solid tight end, in my opinion, in the 7th round was Dallas Goedert at 710. Then I started really taking like normal receivers, Keenan Allen, Calvin Ridley. And then in the 10th round, I nabbed Nick Chubb, who I think we'll talk about a little bit later. Might be a second half league winner for me. We'll see. Brian Thomas in the 11th and Tyrone Tracy, backup running back for the Giants, who might have some return points as well in the 12th round. I'm actually on the clock right now, and I'm going to take Xavier Gibson, another returner, in the 13th round.
Live drafting on the pod. You love to see it. I might be up by the time this is over, depending on what Sam Holt and Kendall Valenzuela do ahead of me. I love several players on your team, as evidenced by the fact that I have a couple of them. But I will point out, because I went and looked when you said Jaden Daniels earliest you'd seen him gone. It is the earliest he has gone in the Scott Fish Bowl. One other person also took him at the 110, but Gemma, in your draft, tied for the earliest draft of Jaden Daniels. So wild. And get your guy, Gemma. My draft is very different, as I tend to do in Scott Fish Bowl. I had a plan. It was to take CeeDee Lamb at the 103, which is not super normal. It's mostly a quarterback there. And then get Dak Prescott on the way back and have the stack. But someone stole Dak Prescott at the start of the 2nd round. We both got sniped on the quarterback we wanted. So I said, okay, well, screw that strategy. And I took Trey McBride and Kyle Pitts back-to-back in the 2nd and 3rd. So I have 2 elite tight ends. Yes, Kyle Pitts is elite. And then I went Isaiah Pacheco, who I love. Finally took my first quarterback with Kirk Cousins, who I also love. I'm in on the Falcons. And then I took Rashid Shaheed at the 603. So if he gets that return work we're hoping for, both of us are going to be pretty set on that front. And then I went running back with Jonathan Brooks, Tyjae Spears, and Javonte Williams, who I believe have at least one complete knee between the 3 of them, maybe. And then I went technically 3 quarterbacks in a row: Aaron Rodgers, Gardner Minshew, and Taysom Hill. But let's be honest, I drafted Taysom Hill as a tight end. He's going to get the tight end 1.5 premium reception scoring. So I think he might be a weekly starter for me. We'll see. Anyone who's known me for any amount of time knows that I love Taysom Hill. He's one of my favorite players in the NFL. And I'm going to be probably hammering wide receiver for the next 8 picks, because I literally only have Lamb and Shaheed, if he even counts.
Okada, your draft is perfect for today's show with all these injuries. You got the Achilles quarterbacks, double Achilles here with Kirk and Aaron Rodgers. You've got Jonathan Brooks coming off the ACL. We've got Javonte Williams, question marks all around the Denver backfield with his 2nd year off the ACL. So this is timely. I'm proud of you for timing this up perfectly.
This was 100% done for this pod, Bets. I drafted this so that we could go through my team and figure out if I'm doomed or going to win the Scott Fish Bowl.
We'll find out.
We'll get to those injuries in a little bit, so stick around for that. But before we get there, training camp is in full swing. Every team will be fully reported in 2 days from now on Wednesday, if I'm not mistaken. But most teams are fully reported now. All the coach speak is happening. All the Twitter videos, they are happening. So we are going to pop in on the storylines we are most interested in watching. We've each got 2. And if you're interested in reading another 26, is that math? Betts has an article with the Fantasy Footballers where he hits an interesting storyline on every single team in the league in training camp. So go check that out. How long did that take to write? Be honest.
Just absolutely sick behavior on my part. It's like early July, right around July 4th, like we should be outside seeing sunlight. I'm writing this article. It took days and days and days to put together. It's funny when you put the preview in Slack, the estimated preview time to read it is 54 minutes. Right. So truly sick behavior on my front there. But it was fun, man. I love doing that article. I do it every year. And it really kind of opens your eyes to be like, are we just going with the flow here? Like, should we take a step back and ask questions of like, how does this go wrong? Or are we missing something? And one of the pieces that I put in it last year, I'll never forget this. I was looking at like, there's wide receiver 2 opportunity in LA. And this is crazy because at the time it was like, Van Jefferson, like someone's got to do it. It's got to be Van, right? And then you open your eyes, like, a week into the season, you're like, oh, whoops.
Oh,
right. It's Puka
that guy.
So last year it led me down the right path, but to the wrong player. So yeah, good article. Go check it out if you have a week off of work to read
it. True. All right. Well, we're gonna kick it to you first, and this is someone's gonna get targets, but which guy is it again? So not in LA this time, over in Houston. What are you watching for?
Yeah, Houston is fascinating, right? Just because you've got 2, I think, superstars in Nico Collins and Tank Dell. And then you add in Stefon Diggs, and everyone, of course, is projecting a year 2 jump from CJ Stroud after what we saw as a rookie from him. The problem for me is that it feels like someone here loses out. And this is kind of where you have to make your call in fantasy with all guys going pretty high. For me, when I look at this offense under Bobby Slowick, and you would think this is going to change, but last year they were bottom 10 in the rate of 11 personnel on first downs. Rational coaching would say you get Stefon Diggs, you're going to change that, get your best players on the field. But if that does not change, we have a major, major issue here with these 3 guys. And even if they do go with 11 personnel, this is a spot where I don't know if this is a contrarian take, but I'm not sure Stefon Diggs, the way he plays now, matches up with how CJ Stroud prefers to play. Last year, CJ Stroud was among the league leaders in ADOT, very willing to push the ball down the field to Nico and Tank Dell, and among the lowest checkdown rates in the league. So the way he has played, at least when we see in the NFL in a small sample of 1 year, has been a downfield passer. And Stefon Diggs' ADOT year over year is dropping, and we saw that really come to fruition last year in Buffalo. So I have been pretty bearish on Stefon Diggs, just kind of with the age curve where he's at relative to Nico and Tank. But how those 3 guys mesh together and how the targets are distributed between the big 3 in Houston, to me, is fascinating.
Yeah, I will say I do wonder how much of the ADOT situation is a chicken and the egg thing, because when you have Nico Collins and Tank Dell, you're going to push the ball downfield, and you don't have one of the league's best underneath route runners. Now you do, at least he has been for much of his career. Will that change what Stroud does? I think that really does affect how those targets play out. So we'll see. John, you have all 3 guys in the 20s in your wide receiver rankings. It's Nico, then Tank, then Diggs. That's, I believe, heavily based on projections. So how much of that is like kind of hedging between the 3? And do you expect that it will end up being farther apart than that?
Yeah, so I discussed a little bit yesterday when you do full projections, you can't just sort of rank players where you want to rank them. It's like you come up with a passing attack, projected yards, projected touchdowns, and you divvy them up amongst all the different receivers on the team. And it's not like I can just put Collins wherever I want to put. I guess I can, but then that's going to impact Dell and Diggs as well. So I think there is a lot of uncertainty here, and that's why I have maybe Nico ranked lower than consensus. I think he's 13th off the board right now, and I've got him at 20. I think this is probably unusual. I have Dell ahead of Diggs. I have Dell at 25 and Diggs at 28. And I think, Stefon's got a little work to do in order to get to where he's got the same rapport with CJ Stroud as Dell and Nico Collins do. And, Stroud, I think, was asked to design a play with any of the receivers in the league, and he actually picked Dell as one of his receivers. So it's obvious that he really likes Tank Dell. I feel like Diggs might be the odd man out. He'll get his targets, but it's not going to be the same stuff on Diggs that we've seen in Buffalo, or even that we saw perhaps in Minnesota before that.
Yeah, that seems like an almost sure thing. Not a sure thing, but another wide receiver mess situation. You are looking at the pass catchers in Buffalo. What are you looking for specifically out of that group?
Well, so Stephon Diggs moved on. So did Gabe Davis. And so we have lots of turnover here in the Buffalo receiving core. They drafted Keon Coleman. I think a lot of folks have just basically inserted him as the number one receiver, but he didn't fare particularly well in Matt Harmon's reception perception. And that's sort of my go-to. Other players have not done well coming out of college and then lit it up. Rashee Rice was last year's example. So it's possible that Keon Coleman comes in here and is the wide receiver one. But another player that Harmon has always liked is Curtis Samuel. And in terms of route running and just overall ability and versatility. And I think he is the guy of this group that right now I want until I see something change in terms of news, or, Keon Coleman's just lighting up camp or something like that. Really like Samuel's route running, and he has produced in many different spots over the years, and he's still relatively young. So I think he comes in here and he's the wide receiver one, but I don't think it's going to be by a wide margin. And that's why I've got him ranked where I do, which it looks like it's in sorry for the dead air here. There he is. I had to find him. 38, wide receiver 38. Coleman is below that. He's at 52 right now. And then Khalil Shakir is, somewhere in the 60s at the moment. But, this will probably change. That's why it's one of these things I want to watch is, how many targets these guys see even in camp. We got beat reporters now reporting on targets in camp, which is great because you do get a sense of where the quarterback's going to go with the ball with those numbers. So that's helpful as well. It's not a hard and fast rule, but it is helpful to see that player X or player Y is getting the most targets from the quarterback.
Yeah, Betts, I think the most interesting question here is, can any of these guys be a wide receiver one? Do you think any of them can, or is it just going to be a 17 wide receiver 2 or 3s type situation and none of them are actually elite for fantasy or even great for fantasy?
Yeah, that's kind of how I see it. And it's so tricky because I think most people would agree Dalton Kincaid is likely to lead this offense in targets this year. I mean, quietly, 4th most catches by a rookie tight end ever. Yet Sam Laporta did what he did, and no one really talks about that. So if you get that year 2 lead from him, and this offense under Joe Brady really took a step back in their pass rate, Josh Allen's rush attempts were up, his designed rush attempts were up. I really have a tough time seeing if one guy wins out. I think if there is one guy that just kind of has a double-digit touchdown season based off how he plays, it could be Keon Coleman. Though, kind of like John was mentioning, the film folks out there didn't think he was necessarily the cleanest prospect. His numbers from like a per route run basis in college were kind of bad, truthfully. So I don't think he's necessarily the cleanest prospect in the world. And then you've got just, I think, a rotation between Curtis Samuel, who probably with Joe Brady is going to get some of the downfield stuff, but also some of the backfield stuff and jet sweeps and all those kind of things and screens. And then you've got Khalil Shakir, who, like, I know there's some people that are huge fans of, but to me, I mean, this is a guy that ran 5 routes all year last year with 2 wide receivers on the field or fewer. So he was like strictly a 3 wide receiver set type of guy. If that does not change, like, I don't know. It's tough to see. So I think it's going to be a rotation. I think he could be frustrated. The comp that I like for this situation, and we kind of did it all offseason last year, is like, okay, Lamar's going to throw more than we've ever seen. Like, who is the dude you need? And obviously Zay Flowers emerged and he was pretty good for a rookie. But like, we all were like, is it Odell? Is it Rashad Bateman? And they kind of just did this whole rotation all year. That's kind of what I see happening with Mark Andrews to Dalton Kincaid being the comp of he's the target earner. So yeah, I am not that excited. If there is one guy that I'm taking right now based off ADPs, it is Curtis Samuel.
All righty. Well, we've got another through line here because you mentioned Lamar and the Ravens offense. The new OC out in LA, the LA Chargers, can't even say in SoFi because they both play there, is Greg Roman, who used to run that offense out there. New head coach is Jim Harbaugh. This is a completely new regime, as we've all heard many, many times. So my big question that I'm watching for in Chargers camp is who is going to get the significant snaps at literally every position of relevance except for quarterback, because obviously that's Justin Herbert. At wide receiver, you've got Joshua Palmer and Quentin Johnston carrying over from last year. But after that, it's newly acquired DJ Chark and rookie second-round pick Ladd McConkey. I do not know how those four are going to shake out and how often they're playing, especially in 2 wide receiver sets, which we might see a lot of, given how much we expect this team to run the ball. And then I don't know, similar to the Bills situation, can any of these guys become a true one? Palmer, his best season was 107 targets and 72 catches in 2022, but he had just 769 yards and 3 touchdowns with that work, so that doesn't stand out all that much. Quentin Johnston, I don't know if there are any truthers left, but one of the most disappointing first-round rookie seasons in recent memory. He would have to take a huge step forward. DJ Chark had a 1,000-yard season back in 2019, but that was 5 years ago at this point. He hasn't done much since. Ladd McConkey looks great as a prospect. I think a lot of people like his tape, some of his analytics numbers, but his production profile is very weak. 58 catches and 762 yards was his best collegiate season, and that was in 15 games. So can he be a true number one? Will he be out there in 2 wide receiver sets? I'm not sure. I wanted to ask Hayden Hurst, who was at the SFB live show in LA, or live draft in LA this past Saturday. Didn't get a chance to. That's all the pass catching situation.
That's what
Meanwhile, oh yeah, of course. I listen. I was in the middle of a draft. I was making important picks to set up for this podcast. What do you want from me? Then at the running back position, it's Mr. Perennial backup that's forced into a starting role, Gus Edwards. It's J.K. Dobbins, who we'll talk about later, who hasn't been healthy, I don't think, since high school. And then it's rookie 6th-round running back Kimani Vidal. Day 3 running backs, not necessarily where you want to put your money. Don't know what's going to happen there. And then at tight end, I'm even a little bit interested, speaking of Hayden Hurst. Jim Harbaugh, back when he had a pocket passer in Alex Smith, Vernon Davis was actually an interesting fantasy tight end. Hayden Hurst, Will Dissly, Donald Parham Jr., I don't know. It is a giant mess here in LA, so I am really curious to see how it plays out. John, do you have any strong feelings?
Well, there's a lot to unpack there. I'll just start with, because I don't want to forget it, by Hayden Hurst story. He walked in and I thought it was George Kittle. No offense to Hayden Hurst, but I hadn't seen Hayden Hurst outside of a football helmet. So I figured it out. He came over, took a picture with the group, and I did. There was a couple people asking him questions, and he thought that the system was going to be great because he's already been in it. He expects to have his biggest year of his career. And I think I heard him say that he was going to be not online as much, not doing as much blocking. So it sounded like he might be in the slot quite a bit. So take that with a grain of salt, because I was half paying attention to what he was saying and wasn't sure who he was, but I figured it out and used my context clues to figure that all out. So I think, tight end's probably the least interesting of this team. I mean, you got Dissly, you got Hurst, you got Donald Parham. It's probably going to be Hurst leading this group of tight ends in receiving yards, but we'll see. For me right now, it's at receiver, it's McConkey and Palmer in that order as the 2 top receivers. I did a pretty good dig into Joshua Palmer, his season, and Allen was in and out. Keenan Allen was in and out of the lineup. Mike Williams was out most of the season. In the 4 games, Palmer averaged 74 yards in the 4 games he played without Allen, or with Allen and without Williams. One of those games was cut short due to injury. In the 3 games he played without both Allen and Williams, he posted 113 yards, 47 yards, 44 yards, which was a 68-yard average. So without Williams, basically Palmer played at a 73 catch, 1,200-yard, 2-touchdown pace. So I bumped him up after kind of digging into his splits with what was going on there at receiver there last year. I mean, there's so many targets up for grabs. I think Palmer probably is either the wide receiver 1 or a wide receiver 2, and that will sort of depend on how quickly Ladd McConkey sort of establishes himself. Wasn't the most productive player in college, but really good athlete and really good route runner according to reception perception as well. So I'm sort of in on those two. Chark has always been sort of a deep threat, does very poorly in the route running metrics. Johnston's obviously had a tough start to his career. I'm not banking on a big leap here for him either. So those are the two I want: McConkey, Palmer, sort of later in drafts if I can get him later. And then at running back, I think we talked about this a little bit last week, but Gus Edwards looks like he's going to be the lead back as long as he's healthy. We'll see if Dobbins can push him or if Vidal can push him. But everything I'm seeing is Gus Edwards as the RB1 there, and that's some sneaky volume in this offense with Greg Roman calling the plays.
Betts, are you drafting any of these guys at value right now?
Yeah, I think McConkey and Palmer are totally fine picks. Palmer's like kind of like John was saying, like quietly a pretty good NFL wide receiver. Now, is that going to translate to like a league-winning season for fantasy? No, of course not. But wide receiver 3 type numbers or a flex fill-in, like, yeah, I think he's going to give you those numbers, especially with his connection with Justin Herbert as far as the on-field chemistry. So I like that call. McConkey, I like as well. We'll just have to see, like, does he earn his way on the field in 2 wide receiver sets or not? That's kind of the question for me entering camp, but that's kind of where I'm at. And then at the running back position, J.K. Dobbins it's so tough. Like, we need to see just a season in the NFL, right? Like, just get through the season is kind of what he needs. He's only making $50K guaranteed, which is basically nothing, right? So like they can cut him for nothing right now. And he's not necessarily a lock to even see work in this backfield coming off his first year off the Achilles. So that's a player and injury that just in general at running backs we bet against and almost always works out. So that combined with the contract, I have not taken any J.K. Dobbins, don't plan to. And I think Gus Edwards is like, it's the most boring pick in the world, right? For fantasy. Like no one's like showing their buddies like, dude, I just got Gus Edwards in the 10th round. Look at this. But I mean, I think he's probably going to get goal line work, and I think he's probably going to have more work than anyone's like excited for. And as a flex or RB2, if you go like a 0 RB route, I think that's totally fine. I have heard literally nothing on Kamani Vidal since like the NFL draft happened, which for a day 3 guy is usually a very red flag. So I'm watching in camp to see if there's anything positive in terms of hype on Kamani Vidal.
John and I talked a little bit last week about Gus, and it's his name, his Gus Edwards. That's why nobody is excited about him. But if you look at his numbers, he's very efficient and he scores. Yeah, it's kind of exciting. I don't know. Plus, he's on the Chargers now. It feels, more electric. Okay, terrible joke. Moving on. Okay, Betts, let's throw it back to you. This offense is much more stable at the top than the ones we've been talking about. It is the Detroit Lions. You've got Amon-Ra and Sam Laporta. You know who the running backs are, but you're interested in a player that's been a little bit further down the depth chart.
Yeah, this is the, make or break time for Jameson Williams. And he's, I think, arguably the most polarizing player in fantasy because you can make the case for or against him and both sort of make sense. Like going back to his college tape, I was a big fan. Obviously, he was drafted, I think, 12th overall by the Lions, goes to a really good system. But needless to say, it's been a very rocky start to his career. As a rookie, he recovers from the torn ACL. Year 2, the suspension with the gambling thing, plus picked up a hamstring injury in camp and really was just kind of eased back in. And then we saw like a flash in the playoffs. And whenever that happens, fantasy drafters are so funny. The next year they're like, well, I just saw this a few months ago. And now there's hype. I don't know when the Lions start camp, but I guarantee you in the first day or 2, there will be a highlight on your timeline of JMO in shorts beating a defender deep down the field, and his ADP is going to skyrocket, right? So he's just a polarizing player that I find myself on the other side of it, where people get hyped about guys like this, but historically betting against this sort of profile of just like, we haven't really seen it. It's year 3. You can make excuses for guys all the time, but when you do that, you get in trouble. I'm on the other side of it. He's a guy that I think will be awesome for Detroit as far as like filling the role of, he's going to stretch the defense, open it up for Amon-Ra, Laporta, Gibbs underneath, but really be a guy that you're just chasing in fantasy, where he'll have some deep receptions for touchdowns, but trying to predict that, I think, is going to be very, very difficult, especially considering best case scenario, he's 4th on this team in projected targets, right? Amon-Ra St. Brown is a stud. Sam Laporta just had the best rookie season we've ever seen. Jahmyr Gibbs is a stud as a pass catcher, and those 2 players are entering year 2 when we tend to see players make the leap. So if all those things happen, I just don't see it for Jameson Williams, especially paired with Jared Goff, who is consistently is among, the lowest in the league in terms of ADOT and his ability to push the ball down the field, or preference to push the ball down the field. So I've been pretty much a full fade on Jameson Williams, which is terrifying because of how electric and exciting he can be. But he does join an absolutely terrifying list. And caveat, this is regular season numbers, but first round NFL wide receivers since, let me look at the year here. This is since 2015. Kevin White, Nelson Aguilar, Philip Dorsett, Laquan Treadwell, John Ross, Jameson Williams, the only players in the first round of the NFL draft to not have a 14-plus fantasy point game through 2 years in the league.
Wow.
Seems like a good guy to bet against. I could be wrong, but I'm just on the other side of it.
I'm pretty sure that's the Mount Rushmore of wide receiver busts, so that is rough. For what it's worth, by the way, it used to be the case back in the good old days that year 3 wide receiver breakout was the thing. I don't know if you guys remember this. Before all these rookies ended up being, league winners somehow. So maybe for Jameson, I'm more with you, Betts. I'm not super in. John, you have him at wide receiver 51 in the range of guys like Brandon Cooks and Keon Coleman. Do you think he has more upside than some of the guys in that range, or kind of similar take as Betts?
Yeah, looking at it, and we have also general consensus in our rankings. It looks like it's at 45, so I'm like 6 spots low on him. But, as I was writing him up, the things that jumped out to me wasn't so much, his stats are just like, what do you even do? What do you even do with his rookie numbers of 1 of 9 targets for 41 yards and a touchdown, and then 1 carry for 40 yards? Like, this isn't information that's useful. So the thing that jumped out to me, and I have to sort of balance it with my rule in the off season, is don't get too hyped up about the positive talk, but anytime there's something negative about a player, pay attention, because there's so much positive news in the off season and very little negative news. But Dan Campbell said that Williams will, quote, push to be a full-time starter this season. He also said that he was, quote, a man on a mission. So it sounds like he's doing what he needs to do to impress the head coach, which is, there are so many snaps available because of Josh Reynolds moving on. And I think they're, in a pretty good position because they have either the upside of Jameson Williams or the stability and sort of baseline production of Khalif Raymond if they want, just more stable play. But to Matthew's point, I was just looking up Goff, and his adjusted deep ball completion percentage last year was 6th in the league, 54.3%. But to Matthew's point, his attempts were only 7.6%, which is way lower than most of the guys in the top 10 who are all over 11% at least. One of the lowest in the league. So was his, this may go back to his, years in LA and everything. Is he just reluctant to push the ball down the field, or specifically to last year, they didn't have like deep ball options? Amon-Ra St. Brown's more of a lower ADOT guy. Laporte is a tight end. Josh Reynolds was not a deep ball guy. Was that part of it as well? So they do now have a guy who, looking at Jameson Williams' junior year at Alabama, 79 catches, 1,572 yards, 15 touchdowns after 2 really quiet seasons at Ohio State. I'm intrigued. I think he's one of these, and it's maybe a cop out, but he's one of these better and best ball guys because, as Matthew mentioned, probably the 4th option most weeks, unless there's an injury to one of these guys. The weekly production is probably not going to be as consistent as you'd like for a regular redraft fantasy league.
I think it's really useful to point out what you did about Goff there, in that he's good when he throws the ball downfield. He just has not as much. And this kind of goes back to what we talked about earlier with the chicken and the egg situation. If you've got ASRB, Laporta, and Gibbs, which is probably the best sub-10 ADOT trio in the NFL, you're probably going to throw closer to the line of scrimmage most of the time. If Jameson Williams comes in here and starts getting a lot of snaps as a first-round guy who's an unbelievable burner, does that change how often Goff does it? And if he does, with what he's shown in his ability to succeed downfield, maybe that's a big deal for Jameson. So worth watching. Definitely a good one to keep an eye on in camp. John, I'll throw it back to you for a quarterback and a rookie quarterback, no less, that you're looking to watch for.
Yeah. Jaden Daniels is very intriguing due to the rushing. And we all know about the Konami code, how we want fantasy quarterbacks to run the ball. He comes in at 44 yards rushing in my rookie quarterback model, which my rookie quarterback model basically uses their last year's college stats to give me a baseline or give me a starting point for their passing stats and their rushing stats. And it doesn't really do that good of a job with the passing, but the one area that it does a really good job of predicting is their rushing yards per game. So he's coming in at 44, which is extremely high in the sample that I have. So, I've got him ranked QB 12, which I think now is right on general consensus. He was starting off at QB 16, 17, has moved up over the last month or so as everybody's realizing his rushing upside. But the thing that's really intriguing about him is his passing, and he's got a pretty good portfolio to look at. And the interesting thing, another reception perception plug, but Derek Klassen over there charted all the rookie quarterbacks last year and came away with CJ Stroud being the most accurate passer out of that group. And that obviously panned out quite well. So I was looking at his data this year, and Jaden Daniels comes out as the most accurate charted quarterback of the rookies over at Reception Perception as well. So I did read his write-up, and he is a little worried about Daniels' willingness to throw the ball over the field. There's some layup throws that he was not taking in college, and I think some of that will get ironed out, and he'll have to. But in terms of throwing the ball accurately all over the field, he's able to make all those throws. And for a guy who's going to run as much as he is, that really could end up with being a very good fantasy season. The one thing I'm concerned about him is, does he figure out how to not get himself killed? I saw a montage of the hits that he was taking in college. And if he does that in the NFL, where everybody's another 30, 40 pounds heavier, he's gonna end up on the IR. So in the preseason, I'm hoping to see him run and figure out how to slide and figure out how to avoid those hits. And I'm also looking to see, how much he's throwing the ball over the middle, because if he's able to do those two things, he's going to be a boon for fantasy managers.
Yeah, I think the rushing floor helps a lot in just evaluating this guy's going to do something for fantasy. The passing changes the upside. Betts, how much do you care about what we see from him as a thrower for whether you're willing to draft his pass catchers out in Washington?
Yeah, quite a bit, actually. Jaden Daniels, John had mentioned, obviously, the rushing we expect. His scramble rate these last couple of years at LSU was insane. So historically, we know just these the elite rushing quarterbacks tend to take away, obviously, pass volume from their offense. And we're coming off a season where, even though Sam Howell, for real life NFL was not good, for fantasy, put up some QB1 numbers, right, in the certain matchups. And if you had him in Superflex, was a totally fine QB2 starter for you. But even that, his wide receivers didn't really help you that much. McLaurin was fine. Dotson was a massive bust. And now you go from the league leader in pass volume of what they saw last year to now an elite rushing quarterback. He has to be a good thrower of the football for it to matter for Jahan Dotson and Terry McLaurin. Dotson, I am terrified for, right? After the expectations we had last year of saying, okay, could he make a year two leap? He was one of just a few of Kyle and I joke on our show on the DFS pod, one of the boys, which is the sub 1.0 yards per route run crew. The names on that list are terrifying. And so now I'm asking myself, was he that good as a rookie? I don't really know, right? His numbers as a rookie were fine, nothing outstanding. But after someone does that in year two, you have major question marks. And so the quarterback, if he's going to run the way we think he is, has to be really efficient as a passer for it to matter for his pass catchers. So I'm kind of lukewarm on Terry McLaurin. I think he's a pretty solid pick, and I'm terrified for Jahan Dotson.
Yeah, I think it's worth remembering Jahan Dotson scored some touchdowns as a rookie, and I remember a lot of them being highlight touchdowns, and so that stood out. But beyond that, he was not reliable, and he hasn't done anything except score those touchdowns that I can really remember. So it's a little iffy. All right, last bit of training camp to watch, and it's not a bad transition into our injury hour, which is coming up after that. It's not an hour, guys, don't worry. I'm looking at Aaron Rodgers. I haven't seen it yet. I need to see it. What can we expect from Aaron Rodgers in 2024? Are we going to get back to the MVP / Hall of Fame guy that we knew a few years ago? Obviously, the last time we saw him was 4 opening snaps of the 2023 season before he tore his Achilles. But the last time we saw him before that, he had arguably his worst season as the Packers starter in 2022. He had an 8-9 record, career low in yards per game, career low in passer rating, just 26 touchdowns. The deeper analytics were middle of the league instead of top of the league like they should be for him. It was the year after Davante Adams' departure, so you could, in some degree, argue it was the first time he hadn't had a true stud on the outside to work with. He had this bevy of young guys that Green Bay still has, and all a year younger than they were last year when some of them broke out. Now he theoretically does have one of those guys again in Garrett Wilson. So do we see 4,000 yard, 40 touchdown Aaron Rodgers again? Because if we do, he is a massive value in fantasy drafts. I feel like he's being drafted as the guy we saw in 2022. And if he is that guy, first of all, Garrett Wilson could be the wide receiver 1. He certainly will be a wide receiver 1. But you have to figure there's probably more value to be found in that receiving core elsewhere, whether it's Mike Williams, assuming he gets healthy, Xavier Gibson, who's a fun pick in the Scott Fishbowl, as John has pointed out for us, Alan Lazard, Malachi Corley, maybe Tyler Conklin at tight end. I'm not sure who. The names aren't superb, but if Aaron Rodgers gets back to what he could be, somebody else is going to be good. So I want to see how good he looks, how fresh he looks. Is he moving well? Are we going to get back the old Aaron Rodgers of old bets? I didn't include him in the injury section, so we can just hit on it here. Do you expect him to be 100%? Do you see any concerns?
Yeah, as far as where he's at in his career arc, obviously we're expecting a 0 in the rushing category for Aaron Rodgers. Not even considering the Achilles, just in general, right? So now you throw the Achilles on, you're not getting any of that. But from a in the pocket and around the pocket mobility standpoint, I think he's going to be fine, right? This injury obviously happened in week 1 last year. When you think about how it affects his throwing mechanics, it's his left leg as opposed to Kirk Cousins' right leg. And when you think about a right-handed pocket passer, when they drop back to push off their back foot, it's the right foot to kind of push the ball down the field. So all of that considering, I think Rodgers is largely going to be playing this year at 100%. He did have a slightly different procedure for his Achilles than Kirk Cousins. His procedure was a little bit more innovative, kind of the Cam Akers mold from a few years ago, where it was accelerated in the recovery and that sort of thing. And I could talk for hours about that, but I'll save everybody.
It had a fun name, and I remember seeing diagrams on NFL Network, but I don't know what it was.
The bridge procedure is what it's been called. But bottom line is that he will be 100% this year from a health standpoint. But I agree with you. Like, there's so many question marks. Just who is he anymore, right? We just haven't seen it in so long. And it does obviously have ripple down effects to the offense in general, specifically with Garrett Wilson. So yeah, it's fascinating.
John, you pretty much have him right where ADP has him, which is QB 19, QB 20. That sounds like you aren't confident. Do you have any hope?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's upside here. I've got him towards the bottom of that last group of guys I'm sort of semi-comfortable with going into the season as my QB1. If I were to go late round quarterback, he could easily jump up a few spots if he's having, a better year than what he did at the end of his career in Green Bay. I mean, even so, he had 3,700 yards passing, 26 touchdowns, 12 interceptions. His yards per attempt were not great, 6.8. But then you go and just kind of dig a little deeper, and we all was like, oh yeah, he was dealing with, a receiving core that was, maybe not as talented. We lost, as a Packer fan, I watched this, and we lost Davante Adams, and that was obviously his security blanket. Alan Lazard was the most targeted player, who may not even be in the starting rotation for the Jets now. He had 60 catches for 788 yards and 6 touchdowns. So the fact that Rodgers was able to carry him to that sort of a season where he got paid pretty well by the Jets. Aaron Jones, second in targets. Romeo Doubs, I believe, was a rookie that year, 67 targets. Robert Tonyan, 67 targets. And Christian Watson in 14 games got 66 targets. For a quarterback who is notoriously not eager to play with rookie receivers, for 2 of his top 5 targets to be rookie receivers, to lose Devontae Adams. It's not surprising that he had his worst season in the last decade. Just looking at his weapons in New York with Breece Hall, a good pass catching running back coming out of the backfield, Garrett Wilson, awesome receiver, Mike Williams, if he can stay healthy, great downfield threat. They've got the rookie Corley, Alan Lazard, Xavier Gibson as well. Not much at tight end, but Conklin's okay. The big thing looking at the Jets as offense as a whole is that they completely revamped their offensive line. They could make a really quick turnaround from one of the worst units in the league last year, and they've obviously prioritized the offensive line play. So I think this will help Breece Hall and Aaron Rodgers in the passing game as well. So I do think, there's some things that could happen here that might bump up Rodgers in the preseason if they're kind of humming and off. I mean, part of it too is I watched the Hard Knocks last year, and the Jets coaching staff and the Jets were just so smug about the fact that they had Rodgers and, we're totally set. And I understand that. I mean, they've been dealing with some quarterback problems there for years. But I'm just like, I'm a little reluctant to just, put Rodgers back up into the top 12, which is talent-wise probably where he needs to be, belong. But it's him and Cousins there with the Achilles injuries, and I think they're solid QB2s, but I'm not ready yet to put them in that QB1 conversation.
My starting Scott Fishbowl quarterbacks.
Yes.
Let's go. All right. Well, let's carry that injury discussion straight into we're just going to hammer rapid fire bets on all of the major relevant fantasy injuries going into this season, into camp and into the season. Get your take, relatively the quick version, and then we'll react. So we'll start it off with the number one name, and that's Nick Chubb. Obviously, injured his knee week 2 of last year. It was the same knee he injured at Georgia. Really sad to see. I recently saw that he shared on Instagram that he feels like he's behind in his recovery, which we never hear. People are only ever ahead in recovery. That sounds terrible to me, but is it actually terrible bets, or what can we expect from Nick Chubb?
Imagine being behind or even on schedule in the year 2024. Literally cannot be me. We just had TJ Hawkinson news, quote unquote news, right before we recorded or came on here that said he's well ahead of schedule. So obviously, different story. We'll talk about him. But yeah, for Nick Chubb, it's tough. I'm not going to be taking any Nick Chubb this year. He's a guy that I think when you look back at the season, when you look back at the end of the year and say, how did Nick Chubb do in 2024? To me, if he contributes to the Browns in like a 8 to 12 touch type of role as like a change of pace backup player, that is a win for this injury that he had. Obviously, major injury in Georgia, beat the odds, came back from that. Now you have a player who is at a very different part of his career, right? He's kind of on the back nine of his career, especially for running back age. You're coming off of not just 1, but 2 surgeries on the same knee, one in September to address the meniscus, his MCL, as well as it's called the capsule, basically this kind of like thick fibrous tissue around the knee. And then a second one in November for the ACL. So you have 2 surgeries to recover from. And if you just said, okay, he only tore his ACL in November, you would say, Nick Chubb's definitely getting off to a slow start, but maybe in November, December, he could be back to himself. Now you add the second surgery on top of all of that. And it's such a parlay for me to hit to actually see him being fantasy relevant. Could he, in theory, in like December and fantasy championship weeks be meaningfully different? I suppose. But we got to go a long way to get there. So yeah, the team has talked about not putting a timeline on it. I think that's right for this complex type of injury. I know there was a video of him just squatting about 500 pounds last week, which of course sent his ADP upward about 2 rounds. That's great. And like, it shows that his knee is accepting, heavy loads, heavy weight, but obviously squatting and being able to run and cut and plant off that knee are very, very different conversations. So long-winded way of saying, I am not personally taking Nick Chubb, especially after the ADP bump of the squat video.
John, you took him in the Scott Fishbowl, but that is a league where you really have to kick into gear late to win anything of value, and that's all that really matters. How much of it was that, and how much of it was you believe Chubb is going to be something?
Yeah, I was thinking, after seeing the squat video, I was like, okay. And I need a link to this where he said that he is behind. I cannot find it on his Instagram page. It would have been helpful information to have on Saturday morning.
I'll look around.
You know, he withheld that from you on purpose, John. Just
yeah,
until
maybe, well, we're in different. We're not even in the same draft.
Okay.
So yeah, I think he was a second half pick for me anyway. You're getting him 9th, 10th round. I got him 10th round. I would say I'm a little worried based on Matthew's description. I think our own injury expert Jeff Muller was pretty negative on him as well. I do kind of feel like Chubb is one of these guys that's built a little bit different, and maybe he will get back sooner than later. But his overall effectiveness in terms of getting back to his normal fantasy production is probably a ways away. Yes, for Scott Fishbowl, the whole plan was to maybe have him week 10, week 11, and now have a third really good starting running back there. I feel like I should be able to get by with all my returners, but we shall see. I have him ranked at 35 or 38. He would be very easy to pair with Jerome Ford if you wanted to lock up that Cleveland running game, because Ford is going pretty late. So maybe Ford's the one that is undervalued right
now. For the journalists out there who want me to cite my sources, joc.films is the Instagram. It's not his, but it's a video of him. And the quote is, this is in April: "It's different now because I feel like I'm behind. Usually I'm healthy and I'm working to get faster and stronger. Now I'm just trying to catch up to get to the person I once was."
Well, that's April.
True. It's been a few months. Maybe he's lifting 800-pound squats now, so we're fine.
Yeah, 520.
520. All right, let's move on to another running back with an ACL injury. This one, a rookie, Jonathan Brooks, tore his ACL at Texas last year in November. Just turned 21 yesterday, so a very different situation, obviously, in terms of healing, recovery, timeline, and all that. Panthers placed him on the active NFI list last week. Betts, what's your confidence that he's the starter by week X?
Yeah, interesting situation. Obviously, comparing it to Nick Chubb, the injuries are way different. His is a clean ACL tear. He's a rookie. He's way younger. Obviously, those things work in his favor. The tricky thing is that when you look at the Panthers, they're making an investment, obviously, well beyond 2024 in this player who they took in the second round. And obviously they have no plans to win the Super Bowl this year. So I don't think there's any reason to rush him back for the season. And so they're probably going to take it pretty slow with him, is my opinion. There was a study from a couple years ago from the NFL Combine finding players coming off of ACL injuries and looking back at them in year 1 versus year 2. There was about a 20% reduction in tearing your opposite knee ACL if you waited 22 plus months to come back on the field. In today's NFL, that almost never happens, but just it kind of showed like the earlier you come back, the earlier the risk for the other side being torn. So I don't know if the Panthers are privy to that information, if they care or whatever, but just reading the tea leaves, it's like this guy is clearly their plan for the future. So whenever he's healthy, I do expect him to see the bulk of the touches. To me, the tough part is when is that, and do they slow play it? I think they probably do. But for a guy who had his surgery in early December of this past year, he tore it in November, had surgery in December. You're probably expecting him to be closer to 100% in like November-ish off the injury. So a really fun, like best ball late season upside type of guy, but expecting anything meaningful for fantasy in September or October to me is pretty optimistic, especially considering not only is this player coming off the injury, but also jumping a level of play from college to the pros. So I think a pretty slow start for Jonathan Brooks.
All right, that's a timeline question. John, let me just ask you this. Once he is fully healthy, let's call it November, as Bet said, what do you expect from him for the rest of the season while he's healthy? RB what-ish?
Yeah, RB2 type numbers. I mean, what Chuba Hubbard was providing that last year as, after he beat out Miles Sanders. So, right now I have Brooks at 25, and just based on Matthew's comments there, and he made a good point about the Panthers just not really being in contention this year, and not necessarily even having to win many games to keep the coaching staff's jobs. They probably are in the clear this year, so why rush him back? So I think the takeaway for me is, late season RB2 type. But if you are, drafting best ball teams and want, an early season 0 RB type pick, Chuba Hubbard is free. And he'll very likely be the RB1 there for the first 4 to 6 games if Brooks remains out or at least limited.
All right, we have a trio of quarterbacks, so I'm going to throw them all on the plate and let you hit them how you want, Bets. Kirk Cousins tore his Achilles in Week 8 last year. As you mentioned earlier, the planting Achilles, which matters more. Anthony Richardson, season-ending shoulder injury in Week 5. Also, the concussions were a bit of a concern when he was playing, so that's still on the table or a question mark for some fantasy managers. And then Joe Burrow, who suffered a season-ending wrist injury in November, but had also been hampered for a while, was a serious check-down artist for much of that year. Just seemed like he couldn't get the ball downfield at all. He was just cleared for full contact literally today as we speak. What's your quick hit breakdown on those 3 guys and your expectations for them and their injuries?
Yeah, touched on Cousins briefly already. Remember, it's the right leg. So basically, for me, I think the downfield deep passing in the first month or 2 could take a little bit to come back, just because when you plant off that leg and kind of explode forward, that's where you get a lot of your power from. So I think Kirk Cousins starts Week 1. No real concerns for me there. Just the deep ball accuracy and power is kind of what I'm looking for early in the year. That could lag a little bit. For Anthony Richardson, his surgery to repair a grade 3 AC joint sprain is actually pretty common in elite throwing athletes. So I'm actually not that worried about him at all as far as that goes. He's, a guy that made headlines in like May at minicamp where he had a little bit of shoulder soreness. They were like, we're going to back him off. It's May and no need to rush this. And everyone was like, oh no, like his shoulder's already sore. This is not good news. But anytime a throwing athlete starts to ramp up their volume, their velocity, all those things, right? Frequency, you're going to have a little bit of soreness here and there. So I'm not really worried about that. Anthony Richardson, I think, is going to be good to go for Week 1. And I'm drafting him as such. And then Joe Burrow is really interesting because his wrist injury was an injury to a ligament that's really important for stability for any gripping, especially with like gripping and rotation, i.e. throwing a football. So he's a guy that I think will be fine for this year. But there are some like small concerns for me about just like longevity of the wrist and how does it respond over years of the throwing and gripping a football and all those things over the next decade. So like very, very long-term outlook of like, if you've got him in Dynasty, maybe you bookmark this conversation for 3 or 4 years from now and like kind of circle back to it. But as far as like how he looks for this year, I think he'll be fine. They might limit his days in camp in terms of just like throw a few days here, take a day off, throw a few days here, take a day off, like that kind of thing. But as far as how I'm drafting him for 2024, pretty much drafting him as normal.
John, you've got these guys pretty much ranked where they're going. Anthony Richardson 6, Joe Burrow 7. Seems like you're feeling pretty solid on these. Anything to add there?
Yeah, I would just say Burrow has one of the best receiving cores. I mean, I guess he has in past 2 with Jamar Chase and T. Higgins, but now they got Jermaine Burton there, who's I think a talent upgrade over Tyler Boyd. Mike Gesicki at tight end with Tanner Hudson. So he's got just a lot of different weapons. So, pretty bullish on him for this season. And then, Cousins is a big upgrade for that Falcons passing attack. I think we all know that. So, keeping an eye on his passing in camp will really drive that early season September type performance to see if he's all the way back.
Sounds good. All right, Bets. This might be the one I'm most interested to get your take on. TJ Hawkinson, primarily because we know exactly what he is if he's on the field, which is one of, if not the best fantasy tight end, albeit quarterback change. We'll see how that plays out. But he had his knee injury, both ACL and MCL, if I'm not mistaken, in week 16 of last season. So that is extremely late to suffer a knee injury like this. Last I heard, the Vikings had not put a timetable on his return. That was a little while back. You mentioned that he said feels like he's ahead. Not sure how significant that is because most people say that. I'm just curious, are you drafting him anywhere? Do you expect him to be himself at all at any point this season?
I have not really taken much of him at all this year. It's just one of those, kind of like Nick Chubb. It's obviously a different injury, but like a pretty big parlay to hit to be like, this is the guy you need in December, right? Where he had his surgery not until January 29th of this year. So we're talking about basically very late January, early February, he starts his rehab. By the time you get to the regular season, that's not that much time to actually do the things you need to be a really good pass catching tight end, as far as his route running and explosiveness and being dynamic and all those sort of things. So I think he's a pretty good candidate to start the season on the PUP list. Not saying it's a guarantee, but I think it's pretty likely he starts on the PUP for the regular season. And if not, he's certainly not going to be 100% at all for the first month, 2 months, maybe 2.5 months. So again, like, could he be the guy you need late in the year? It's possible, but you're also coming to a situation where it's a combination of Sam Darnold and a rookie quarterback. And historically, rookie quarterback touchdown rates just aren't that elite. So it's, again, a long parlay to hit for him to be the guy you need. And that's the reason I really haven't taken him much at all this year.
John, do you have any interest in taking 2 tight ends, which you pretty much have to do, taking TJ Hawkinson and just stashing him until the end of the season?
Yeah, it would depend on, roster size and, that kind of stuff. If you want your roster spots to be fluid, you can't, hold on to Hawkinson for 8 games or something. That's where I have him basically missing 8 half the season. So that's why he's at tight end 18. I think I'd rather have Jonnu Smith and Hunter Henry. So I'm just letting somebody else take the risk with Hawkinson and start thinking about him for 2025.
All right, let's hit one more guy in depth, and then we'll quick hit the last few. Javonte Williams. This one's interesting because he's not coming off the injury, per se. He played last year, but we saw a very inefficient, ineffective version of Javonte Williams for much of last season. He certainly got the work, but it did not look like the explosive Javonte we saw earlier in his career, especially in college. Betts, you've made note many a time, as have others, that the first year off of an ACL is typically not as good. What is your take on whether he'll be better this year or how much better he'll be?
Yeah, I've done a couple of studies on this over the last few years, just looking at year 1 versus year 2 off the ACL. And every running back in my sample, and this is going back to, I think it's 2014, has been less efficient on a yards per carry, yards per touch, yards after contact per attempt standpoint than they are, and fantasy points per game, than they are in year 2. Every single one, right? And we have Javonte Williams, who entering the year last year, we all knew this was an ACL plus. Like, this is going to take time. He's not going to be 100%. And then the worst thing that happened, in my opinion, for Javonte was he played in the preseason. And as soon as everyone saw him step on the field in the preseason, they were like, oh, baby, he is back. We're good to go. He's going to be the guy that, beats Betts' study. Like, he's definitely going to be fine. And as we know, he played and he got a ton of work. He was just wildly inefficient with them, I think mostly because of the injury. And just to speak to real quick, Breece Hall, even though he was incredible for fantasy last year, his numbers compared to his rookie year, he was still less efficient, which is maybe not shocking given the state of the offensive line and the quarterback play, but just like, wheels up. Oh my gosh, Breece Hall could be incredible year 2 off the ACL. But back to Javonte, yeah, we kind of knew it would be inefficient, and it was. And now people kind of feel like, in my opinion, might be double counting it a little bit, where if your expectations entering the year were like, it's not going to be his season, 2024 is going to be the year that you want to buy back in on Javonte. That's how I've felt about it all year, going back to last year, and how I still feel about it. I know there's a lot of rumblings and rumors out of Denver of like, does he make the team? Who's the RB3 on this? Like, there's so many moving parts. But just from a health standpoint, I think he's going to be way more healthy than he was a year ago. And if he makes this team, if you're someone drafting early and you get him at a value, I mean, it could be a smash.
Yeah, I mean, given what we saw from him in terms of workload last year, and given what you've just told us in terms of health, John, assuming he is 100%, do you see a world where he's not the lead back? And do you see a world where he is a bell cow back in Denver?
Yeah, I mean, I've seen the same tweets you guys have with talking about him potentially getting cut. I don't know how much I believe that. It seems like they liked him enough last year to feed him a lot. And it was his first year back from the ACL. And just looking at his per game production, he had the RB23 points per game average when the one game where he left early, week 4, he had only 8 snaps that game. When that's removed, he was the running back 23. So he's going running back 30, I think, something like that. I've got him at 28. He's going RB 31. So it just seems like there's some, if he retains the role that he had last year, he's already a value. And then if gets a bump in his per game production, this is a guy that led the league in broken tackles per rush as a rookie. So if he can get back to that, he should certainly be a value, assuming he can hold on to his job.
Yeah, I mean, if anyone has been around since Betts and I were doing our Dynasty podcast years ago, I loved Javonte Williams coming out. Watching him in college, he was incredible. Watching him as a rookie, I think that he will be great if healthy. I expect them to give him the major workload they gave him last year. I don't see these other guys leapfrogging him. So I'm taking him a lot of places, including the Scott Fish Bowl. I appreciate the good words about him here. All right, quick hitters. Primarily, these are guys who have dealt with injuries a good amount, and we just want to know, are they injury prone? Or what do you expect? Betts. Christian Watson, his hamstrings, I don't know who made them, but apparently they didn't make them very well. We've heard the stuff about asymmetry in his muscles. They're trying to fix that. Do you expect him to be reliable and healthy this year, or is this going to be an always issue?
Yeah, it's tough. I mean, the number one predictor of future hamstring injuries is previous hamstring injury. That's just unanimous across the board. There's been so many studies looking at that. So Christian Watson is more likely than, I don't know, I'm making this up, Garrett Wilson to have a hamstring injury this year. Like, that's just kind of the reality. But my comp for Watson right now, and this is going to make people either laugh or feel very frustrated based off how you viewed this player previously, is Will Fuller. And like for years, I was out on Will Fuller because of the ADP, where it's like you have these injury risks, and he's also going in round 3 or round 4. But then there was a year where he had the injury risks, yet he went in like round 8, round 9, and people were just over it, and he was awesome for fantasy. So we have this offseason news of Watson addressing the issue, the team taking it very seriously. They usually are very conservative with their players in season coming off injury in terms of their snap count, workload, that kind of thing. We saw that in the playoffs with Watson. You get the full offseason, you work on it, and yet the market, as far as ADP, is still like, nah, man, we're good. Like, we're not doing this. So I'm pretty in on Christian Watson as far as I think his role in the offense, as far as his 2 wide receiver set role, and just, I mean, if a player is working on their issue and no one's really adjusting to it, we should probably capitalize, especially when the cost is low.
I mean, John and I talked about this whole wide receiver core last week. I think agreed that Watson has the biggest upside of the group. So if he can get healthy, this would be a pretty big steal. Another receiver, Mike Williams, tore his ACL in week 3 last year, has had injuries throughout his career, placed on the PUP last week, although that's different from the PUP where you're going to miss 6 weeks of the season or however it goes. Do you expect him to be good to go by the season, midway in? What do you expect from Mike Williams?
Yeah, I think Mike Williams does play week 1. I do not think he's 100% really early in the season. This is a guy who the Jets have called or said that Mike Williams rather is on the quote Brees timeline. Now, no 2 injuries are the same. No 2 players are the same. It's a different position. But you remember the Brees Hall discussion all last year. It was like, well, it'll probably get eased in, maybe only a handful of touches, and then he'll really explode from like October, November on. And we saw that. And with Mike Williams, I think that's probably what you're going to see as far as when he's healthiest. The tricky thing is he's changing teams for the first time in his career. He's changing quarterbacks, again, but going to a different system, different team. Run first offense mostly, and a big boundary wide receiver coming off the ACL for me is usually a pretty big red flag. I did a study on looking at this of like what wide receivers actually succeed in year 1 off the ACL. Historically, it's the guys that see their ADOT closer to the line of scrimmage, that see enough volume, and kind of had a higher slot rate. And my theory on that is that I think as these players work their way back from injury, you can hide some of the inefficiency with more volume. We saw that a lot with Cooper Kupp when he came off the ACL. The boundary wide receivers, the Michael Gallups of the world and like those kind of guys really struggled in year 1, in my opinion. So I'm pretty down on Mike Williams overall. Again, late in the year, could he have some games and usable weeks? Sure, especially in the touchdown department. But I'm lower on Mike Williams, sadly, because I've always been a big Mike truther. But this year, I'm not too excited.
John, just thumbs up, thumbs down on Mike Williams. You feel good? You feel bad?
He's with Aaron Rodgers there. I think that's a good weapon for Aaron Rodgers. Mike Williams doesn't really seem to care about staying healthy. He just throws his body into the air with no regard to where it comes down. So
John Elway helicopter situation.
I do like my fantasy players to at least care about whether or not they get injured. So from that standpoint, He's probably more of a best ball guy too. Like you just don't know on a weekly basis if you can trust him, whether or not he's going to be healthy enough. But he's going to have some big games, I think, with Aaron Rodgers.
Yeah. All right. Last name. It is the name. If anyone is injury prone, you would point to this guy, and yet these are not the types of injuries. I don't think, Betts, you're the expert, that are supposed to be prone. They're just unlucky. J.K. Dobbins has somehow injured every single part of both his legs over the last 6 years. It's the most unfortunate thing I've ever seen because he looks so good every time he's out there. Do you have any hope for J.K. Dobbins coming off the Achilles to get healthy and stay healthy in an NFL jersey?
JK just needs a year, man. Like, just get through the season is what he needs for his NFL career. I think he's a guy, like, he's still young enough that he gets through the year. Maybe he's, a 6 to 8 touch per game type of guy. Like, and then maybe he gets a contract next year. And we kind of see him as like a year 2 off the Achilles, year 3 or 4 off the ACL removed. And like, you're like, okay, Dobbins is talented. We finally see it. So like from a long-term perspective, I think he's still got some life left in the NFL. For this year, running back coming off the Achilles generally is a bet that I'll make against, especially when you factor in how little time this guy has played in the NFL, how little work he's seen in his time. I haven't really taken him.
John, any closing questions or thoughts for Betts before we sign off?
No, I just want to say thanks for coming on. It's been a great discussion. It's always interesting to discuss injuries with somebody that actually knows what the hell they're talking about, because a lot of Twitter doctors
yes, they
think they know, or they make these declarations and it's not really based in fact or reality.
Great to have you on, Betts. Thank you for coming on. Tell everybody where they can find you, where they can find your stuff.
Yeah, I appreciate you guys having me on. This was fun. All my work is with the Fantasy Footballers. I'll be going on a very short paternity leave here, so hopefully nobody gets injured too badly in the first couple weeks of training camp. But I'll be back in like mid-August to kind of just go through all that stuff. We've got the DFS pod going, the Dynasty pod goes in season, and then the main thing for me right now is updating the injury tracker in the Ultimate Draft Kit. So you get all my thoughts there on every injury as it happens in training camp.
Cool. Appreciate you coming on. Thanks everybody for listening. We will be back, John and I, later this week with Marcus Grant from the NFL Network. So tune in for that. Adios for now.